Welcome, Larissa. How are you
Hey,
today?
I'm great. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. And this is something that actually, uh, this will be interesting for me to talk about because recently I started to read a book about writing. So,
Oh,
this is really, really timely. So, you are a book coach and an author. So, maybe we can start with how do you even get into this? Because that's a quite unique thing.
yeah. I'd love to say that I started out like I've been writing for years and years, but that's not true. I wrote
Mm.
as a child and I had a good
That is
time.
something that I read in your blog that you mentioned that you wrote as a
Yeah.
child.
Yeah, I did write as a child, and I still have the coil bound books of the little stories you write and you bring home to mom and dad, and you're so proud of, and you got the gold star on. But I lost it in my corporate years, and I was writing as like a kind of a copywriter, technical writer for a number of years, and it was not fun. I mean, I enjoyed being creative, but writing about safety procedures doesn't really spark that joy in you. So I lost it for a couple of years, probably 10, 15 years. And then I went through a bout of depression and I needed something to escape and to process. And so I started my husband and I actually have a little side company where we make escape room games for kids. And so we have this one game up for sale and it was doing really well. So I was like, okay, well, I'm off work. I will create a new game. And so I sat down and I was like, I'm going to make this an alien game. Like it's going to be awesome. And so I was writing it and I was having fun. And I got about 10,000 words in. And my husband comes into the room. He's like, well, what are you working on? I said, I think I'm writing a book. and it was so like weird to say out loud, but once I admitted it, I was able to dive in fully. And I wrote for, 6, 7 hours a day for 3 to 4 weeks. And it was so therapeutic. By the end of it, I was almost a different person because I was able to step outside of my reality and into someone else's reality. And it was an amazing transformation. So that's kind of how I got started. And then once the doors were open, they never shut. And I've been writing ever since. So I've been writing pretty much nonstop for 2 years now.
Mhm. So in that moment when let's say you're feeling depressed, most of the time you don't really want to do anything. So what was it that made you even to come up with that idea to start working on this game?
I'm a go-getter. Like
Mhm.
I don't do well. Like when I got sick, I was in that do nothing stage for about
Mm.
6, 7 months. And I I had to make a decision of like, my family was suffering, I was suffering, my parents were worried. I had to make a decision of like, you know, medicine's not enough. I have to do something. This has to come down to me and my decision. And so I just started doing small things. Like I would, cook supper once a week, or I would, try and go for a walk once a day, just like little things. And then my stamina built up, I would say. And I got to the point where I was like, okay, I need a project. I need something to work on that's going to
You even
distract
felt
me.
like you need it?
Yeah, I did. I did feel like I needed it. Like after being off work for so long, um, I wasn't satisfying that side of me that needed to do things, that needed to feel productive. And that was the biggest hit, was that I wasn't productive anymore.
Mhm.
And that's just so far outside my values that it was making things worse for sure.
That's actually a really interesting thing that I think I was talking to one of my friends yesterday about this, how um I think it might even be part of the society that we live in, that if you don't do something, something's wrong, or like you feel like something is wrong, especially if you're a go-getter. It feels, and that's something that I have seen as a challenge for many of my clients, where they actually feel stressed when they try to rest or
Mm-hmm.
relax because they're so used to working all the time that for them it feels really, I think a lot of times it's the opposite for many people, where it's or like it feels uncomfortable to do the work or gets out of your comfort zone, things like that. For them, it's more uncomfortable actually to rest and take some time off. Is it something that you also have experienced yourself?
Yeah, I do. And it's something I've had to learn. And when I started my own business, I was really clear in my boundaries of like, I will not work on weekends and I will not work on in evenings. And because of the clients I serve, that's easy to do. But in the beginning, that was a really hard boundary to maintain. And I say it, and I have a meeting tomorrow on Saturday. So it's like, it's special, right? Like you have to balance it. But I get what you're saying in that it feels almost dirty to take time off, and it's uncomfortable. Like I take an hour for lunch nowadays, and I watch a TV show and I go for a walk. But that's like my ritual. So it's still, even though I'm doing relaxing things, I'm still doing things, that's part of my routine. So it's just this ingrained behavior in us that's so hard to shake, for sure.
So tell me more about the game company that you have, because that's a really interesting, it sounds really interesting. How did you even start that? Or like, what's the story behind it?
Yeah, it's so funny. My husband, probably 3-4 years ago now, we really like escape room style games. Like we go to the physical games and then we buy the board games. And a couple of years ago, he made his own game for me for Christmas. And it was very elaborate. There were things hidden all over the house. It took me 3 weeks to complete it. Like it was just, we have a young family too, so it was like on and off. But and then it kind of just kickstarted this, like, okay, we can make our own games and they're super fun. And so I made one for him, he made one for me. And then I was like, well, why don't we try and sell these? And so we made a game for adults where if you bought it, it came with a gift. So there was a box and we would put stuff in the box, lock the box up, and it would be a gift. So your gift would be playing the game, opening the box, getting a present. And those did pretty well for us. And then we thought, okay, well, we have a young family. Wouldn't it be cool to engage with the kids a little bit? And so we created the kids game, and that is by far our best seller. People love it. And it's just a locked box full of candy. And I think there's 12 different puzzles, like word searches, mazes, physical puzzles. And they love it. People love it. And it's been, a fun side business for us. We don't make a ton of money, but it's just really fun to picture these kids going through our puzzles and like testing their brain power and doing something mildly educational with the reward of candy.
Even like having fun, that is something that I feel it's an important thing to have. But I think as we grow up or grow older, I think we kind of lose that sense of having fun or enjoying small things like that, which you see a lot in kids. Like what do you think is the importance of having fun? It doesn't matter in what way, whether you like play games or just find some fun in whatever you do, but like, what do you think is the importance of that?
It's so, like, as adults, kind of like you said, we lose the ability to have fun. Like we pick up hobbies, and like some of us pick up working out or golfing or playing with our kids, but we lose kind of like what we were talking about earlier. It becomes a thing to do instead of a thing we want to do. So like, I know people, like golf is a really good example. People buy golf memberships and then it becomes this obligation to golf. Right? You spent the money, you've invested, you have to go golfing this weekend, and you might not necessarily want to. And I think like my husband and I, we play games every night, and it's such a good way for us to have fun and connect. We actually talk during these game nights. And, my daughter is only 4, or she's 5 now, she's had her birthday, but I am almost sad for the time when she stays up as late as us, because we will lose that hour that's just for us to have fun and do our own thing. So it's like your question of like, why is it important? it's the balance, like, work-life balance, but that is skewed because especially as women, our work-life balance is you work 8 hours a day and then you work for another 6 hours in the evening. And it's not life. It's not a balance, because that life component is not full of fun. It's full of chores, cooking and taking care of the kids and shuffling the kids around. It's not fun. And so building in a component of fun, that's what gets you your work-life balance, that the way it's supposed to be.
And that, I really like what you said about that. As we grow up, we start to get in this mindset that I have to do it. I think that's even like when it comes to exercise, oh, I have to do it. But as a kid, you didn't really think about, oh, you went to like dancing or something else, or you just did it, but it wasn't just about, oh, I have to go and do it. And that's really interesting. Like, I'm now thinking about what is it that changed? Because even myself, as I was a kid, I would be playing basketball every day. I would have like a workout, things like that. But I didn't feel like it was something that I have to do this or something like that. I actually looked forward to that. And I did enjoy it. But then when you grow up, you're like, oh, I have to go to the gym. Like you get in this mindset that it's like forced thing to do instead of actually wanting to do it. And even still, like, I like to work out. I like to go to the gym. I actually want to go to the gym. But it's so interesting how that changes to I have to. And when you have that I have to, you actually make some kind of resistance towards doing it. Because now it's like, oh, I have to go to the gym, instead of, oh, like I want to go to the gym. You just go to the gym, But speaking of writing, have you noticed with people that you have worked with, what are the biggest challenges for people when it comes to writing?
Mindset. A lot of people come in and they want to write a book. So I primarily work with entrepreneurs that are looking to write a technical business type book, something that's going to boost their business. So it focuses on their programs, their results, their promises. And they come in and they want to, but they're afraid they can't, because writing is hard. And if you're not a natural born writer, it can be quite the challenge to wrap your head around it. But then they get into the so we work through that. We get over that. Like, we set manageable goals. You can do this. So we work through block number 1. And then block number 2 is writer's block, when you want to write and you just don't know what to write or how to say it. And so we work through those blocks. And then the third one is imposter syndrome. And it's such a hard thing to work through. It's something that I struggle with almost daily, and I've gotten better. But that feeling of, I'm not good enough, I don't deserve to be saying this, who am I to be a source on this topic? And it's so crippling when you're trying to publish a book. And the nice part about working with entrepreneurs is they're usually fairly used to that feeling of, I'm not good enough. And because they've been working with a client base, and they've started from ground zero, they did start from somewhere. And so that feeling of inadequacy, they're used to, but that doesn't mean they're good at it. Right. And doesn't mean they're good at overcoming it. And so when you write a book, you are putting yourself out there, and it's not like your one-to-one clients or your groups where you have, 10 people. You're putting yourself out there to an audience of potentially hundreds, and an audience that you don't have face-to-face value with. So it's not like, if you say something they don't agree with, it's not like you can talk them through it. They're going to take your words at face value and they're going to judge it. And so it's really hard to get clients to be okay with that level of vulnerability. And it's manageable for sure, because the pros far outweigh the cons when it comes to writing a book. And imposter syndrome is one of the cons. It's the biggest con for sure, but you get over it. The more you experience, as the good reviews start coming in and you learn to take weight in those, and you start to see the benefits of your book, that imposter syndrome, it starts to ebb away, and it goes away, and it'll come back, but then you fall back on your practices and your routines, and you tell it to go away. And you're in this constant like power struggle, but eventually you outpower it. You get stronger and it goes away. Yeah.
Or even it doesn't go away, but as you said, you are just stronger than it. Or you don't allow it to, because I think that's something that a lot of times, even people that I talk to when it comes to fear, oh, I can't wait until I don't have fear, or I feel this and that. And I'm like, you will always have fear, especially if you're somebody who keeps leveling up, keeps growing. You can't escape from fear. It's natural. But what you can do is to adjust how you react or what you do when you feel that fear, because it's coming. But the question is what you do when it arises, or where you have these thoughts or something like that. So that's a really good point that you made, because you do become stronger the more you overcome that story that you have in your mind, or something that comes up, or those thoughts. Okay, so let's touch on each of those. So with the writing is hard, the word hard, that is something that I hear a lot when people say this is hard or that is hard. It doesn't really matter what they're talking about. But when it comes to writing, what are the things that people have said that are hard? One of them, or like two of them, might actually be the ones that you said that we will touch on next, is writer's block and imposter syndrome. But is there anything else that people have said, or what are the reasons they feel like it's really hard?
Yeah, I was just talking to somebody yesterday, actually, and his biggest roadblock was physical. He had back pain, and to actually sit down and write for an hour was really hard on him. And so we had to come up with a way to do, we came up with kind of two solutions. One, you get to sit at a desk. That's an investment. You have to invest in that, or you find a higher surface, or you get a wireless keyboard or something, some way you can stand and move around and shift and adjust so that physical pain goes away. And then the other is to write in 15-minute blocks. So that's a harder one, because I don't know how experienced you are with writing, but when you get in the flow, you want to go. You don't want to stop every 15 minutes and adjust, but sometimes your body tells you you have to. And so there's a physical block for some people, for sure. And then there's just the time commitment that it takes. Some people don't have an hour a day to write, and it becomes really hard for them. And when we come up against that, it's a priorities thing. It's not that you don't have the hour, it's that you're not prioritizing the hour. And that's the biggest thing. We don't deal with that too much as my clients, because when they come in, they've invested money. And as soon as you invest money, it becomes a priority, right? So people, it's a 10-week sprint where we write for 3 to 4 weeks. And in those 3 to 4 weeks, that's all I'm asking for, is an hour a day for 3 weeks. And you can come up with a really good book in that time. And people do it. But you get the odd one of like, oh, I didn't write today because my kid has a soccer game. And I think the part as a coach is letting them know that that's okay, right? You don't have to guilt yourself. This isn't a punishment because you didn't write. You just maybe write a little bit more the next day, or just count it as a lost day. Not a big deal. Your book's going to take 1 day longer than it would have originally, but you got that mental health day. And when people need those days, like we don't write 7 days a week, we write 5 days a week is primarily the goal. Some people choose to do more, some people choose to do a little bit less, but you get those 2 days of mental health time, and there's no guilt associated to them. So when people think, oh, I don't have time, it's like, well, you build in the time, but you build in the rest as well. So let's say Mondays are really busy at work. You don't write Mondays. You write on the weekends, and you write on, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday.
Even when it comes to writing process, that's one thing that I was reading in this book. I think it's called Everybody Writes, and yeah, it's called Everybody Writes. I won't remember the author though. But she was writing there that, let's say, she calls it the first ugly draft, where you just, instead of focusing on having it perfect, just focus on writing. And she said that it's actually important that when you have written this first ugly draft, you actually take time away from it. And that made me think a bit about what you said, even like those 2 days off during the weekend. Is that, maybe that might actually be helpful to have that time where you distance yourself from it? Or even like in your experience, does that help when you, instead of, let's say, having to write every single day, you actually take a day off or something like that at some point? Is it helping with the writing process?
I think it heavily depends on the person. So for me, I like to write in sprints. So I write 7 days a week until the book is done. Mm-hmm. And I do that because I get so immersed in the story and I have all these details rattling around that if I don't get them out, I feel like I'm going to lose them. But then I have clients, that's not the case. They don't like writing as much as I do. They don't want to see their project every day. And it does help to step away, because when they come up to those times of writer's block, it's like, okay, shift your perspective, write about something different for, 15, 20 minutes, try and unblock yourself. If it's not working, take the day off. And that's your one day off. And it's the mindset that day off is okay. You don't have to write every day. And I think that's why so many people are scared to write a book, is they're scared they don't have the stamina to do it. And you don't have to have unresolved 100% stamina. You just need to have the commitment that you will do this. In some time, you will do this. And it helps to have a goal, in a month. And I should preface, these are short books. These are not full-length novels that you're writing in 3 to 4 weeks. Not by any means. A full novel can take you months to write, and then even longer to edit. These are short technical style books. So they're, 15, 25,000 words kind of a thing. But if you set your goal and you set it reasonable, some people will go, I'm going to do this in 2 weeks. And then when they don't, it sucks. They feel really bad about themselves. And so when we set goals, it's like, okay, you can probably do this in 3 weeks. Let's give you 4. Mm-hmm. Right. And that helps with the mindset of like, I can take a day off because I have 7 buffer days built in.
In a way, what you're describing is leaving a place for error. Mm-hmm. In a way, like counting any human factor, that there will be days when you either don't feel like it, life happens, or something like that. And that's something that I think is really common with New Year's resolutions, which it's coming, soon we'll have a lot of resolutions to make. And that's something that I have seen, even like one person that we're like following each other on TikTok, and he set a goal that he wants to run every day for a year. And I remember I was writing in, I don't remember whether we were chatting or it was like through comments, that goal is quite unrealistic, because now all you really need to do is skip one day and you instantly fail. Yeah. And that's something that for me, it took me a while to change how I'm setting my goals, keeping in mind that, I'm not perfect, I'm human. And the fact that a lot of times when we set these goals, we think of ourselves as somebody who next day, I will be a different person. I will be eating healthy, training like 5 hours a day, writing 10 hours a day, or like whatever. And that's when we set these expectations so unrealistic that we don't keep in mind that there has to be a place for us to fail or miss, or life happens. It's inevitable. Something will come up. So what you said about, let's say, if you set a goal for like 3 weeks, let's do 4. So that you have this like space to navigate if something happens, or you just don't feel like it, or you have a block or something like that. And you don't feel that if you miss a day, you're now behind. Because that's, I think, another feeling that a lot of times people have, is that when they set these goals this way, is that you set your goal where you have no space to fail. So now if you fail even tiny bit, you feel like you're always behind. Yeah. Like you now have to catch up, and that can add you stress. And with more stress, you start to feel overwhelmed, and then you want to procrastinate, and you just go in this cycle where you actually put yourself in a situation where even before you start, you make sure you will make it hard for you to finish by getting in that like cycle. But it's really interesting how it works, because initially we all know that we're just humans. We're not perfect, but when we set our goals, that's when we set them as we are like, there's no chance I will fail, like no chance.
It's really interesting. I just want to add something there.
Yeah.
Like I'm a psych student, so I'm doing my degree, and I was just doing a module on goal setting actually. And they showed that people that are depressed, or I like to call them, this is maybe downplaying a little bit, but the Eeyores of the world. I don't know if you're familiar with Winnie the Pooh, but they just have like an pessimistic outlook on life. We'll set goals that are so astronomical, they're pretty much guaranteed to fail. Whereas the people that are a little bit more optimistic and in a little bit happier mindset, we'll set really realistic goals. And I just thought that's so interesting, that cycle that you're talking about. Someone who's depressed sets these goals that they can't achieve, they don't achieve, and then they feel worse. And they can't come out of it. Whereas someone who's a little bit more cheery, a little bit more optimistic, things are going good, will set goals, nail them, move on to the next one, feel really good about themselves. And I just thought that was such an interesting study that's provable facts. That's what we do.
Interesting thing with this is something that I thought about a few years ago with one of my clients that I was working with, that a lot of times when we set these goals, we set them with high expectations. And he said to me, I don't want to lower my goals. I don't want to lower my expectations. And I'm like, that's fine. I'm not asking you to lower your expectations. I'm all about high expectations. But do you set these high goals because you have high expectations, or like not expectations, but high standards? Or you set them because you now maybe unconsciously put yourself in a situation where you make sure you don't achieve them. And when you don't achieve them, now you have reasons to beat yourself up and feed this negative self-talk or self-beliefs that you have about yourself. So in a way, you create this like self-fulfilling prophecy about what you believe about yourself initially. But you think that I have high standards, I have to set like high goals. But then when you set them so high, they are unrealistic, you actually put yourself in a place where you guarantee that you will fail. And now you have reasons to beat yourself up, or tell yourself, see, I told you I'm this and that, or I'm like this and that. And that's what you said. That's really interesting, because that is something that I remember even like the moment when I was on a walk and I was like, wait, could this be the case? That because a lot of times we have these high standards, or people that are like high performers, they have really high standards for themselves. But a lot of times that can get in our way. And I think that's where our relationship with like failing or not fully achieving the goal is really important, because we can add completely different meaning whether we achieve it or not. Like if I achieve it, most of the time, if I achieve the goal, I know I set the goal too high because I achieved it. If I achieve 80%, that's when I know that's the right range, because for me to achieve 100, I have to be uncomfortable. I have to actually push myself. And that's where I actually don't aim for 100%, because I get 100%. If I get 100%, it means that I put the goal too low. But at the same time, so many people, they have this feeling that if I don't get 100, in a way, I think they might even associate that with their value. If I don't get 100, I'm not 100.
Yeah, it's so dependent on the person, because I am the opposite of you. I'm exactly what you just described. If I don't get 100, I'm not 100. And
I think that's why it's important to know who you are and what works for you.
And that's what we do work on. Like first thing with my clients is, how do you work? What is your motivation? What do we need to set for you to be successful? If some people work like, you get three weeks, I need a hard 3 weeks and I need to be held accountable. Okay, that's what's going to work for you. I'm not going to punish you if you don't, but we will set a goal of 3 weeks. Some people are like, I want to do this in 3 weeks, but I I know I need 4. Like if I fail, this whole project will fail.
Mm-hmm.
And so you've got to set that per person. You really do. Yeah.
So speaking of like what you just said, I think you said if that project fails, I fail, something like that. Maybe you can speak something about like relationship with failure, because that's something that I feel a lot of times we, even as we enter, even when it comes to writing a book, as you enter this process, a lot of times you might even have this thought, what if I fail? Which I think it might be that imposter syndrome. So we might actually start with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, you mentioned it really well earlier. It's fear. It's that fear of failure. And like you said, there's very few people that have that fear of failure. There are some that are more predispositioned to believe in themselves and to know that they can do this. And typically what I find is that's not the people I'm coaching. I love those people, love them when they come through my door. Absolutely great. They believe wholeheartedly that they can do this. But it's most of the time, it's the people that are a little on the fence. They've invested the money, they've made the commitment, but they're still a little unsure. And when I tell them, this is a 10-week program, they're a little iffy. Like, I don't know if I can do this in 10 weeks. And then I tell them, well, you get 4 weeks to write, and that's even worse. And that fear of failure can be the death sentence that your project gets, because the moment you give in to that fear, and this is what I target so heavily with my potential clients, is do not let fear win. With the right support, with the right motivation, you can do pretty much anything. I don't really love that saying you can do anything, because I can't be president, but I can't be president of the United States because I'm not from the United States. Do you know what I mean? But you can do a lot of things that you put your mind to. And the moment you let fear or let that voice win is the moment you lose. And I think that's really powerful when people come into my program. The first module is all about all the ways a book is going to benefit you. And so we start right away from a positive note. But we also address it. It's going to be hard. It's going to be a hard 10 weeks, right? But we have weeks built in where you get a rest and you have me to lean on. Like, there's a done for you component where I take your work and I do some of the work for you, just to make sure that you get the best product possible. And that eases people's fear of failure, because they're not alone. They're not doing it alone. And when we get in groups and we do things, we get a little bit more confident in ourselves. You see that all the time with, like, let's say concerts, for example. You go to a concert and you would never dance in public. And then you get to a concert and everybody's dancing, so you dance. Your confidence goes up 1,000%. And when you partner with somebody like a book coach, your confidence goes up. And that fear of failure starts to ebb away. So instead of having this doomed project sitting in the form of a half-written manuscript, you have someone that's there to say, okay, you're doing great. Keep going. Like, I'm here for you. And it just squashes that fear a little bit.
With the failing, one really interesting thing that I have noticed is that when most of the people, they know I don't want to fail, or I'm even afraid of failing. But then when I ask them, how does the failing or failure actually looks like? They actually have to stop and think about it. And I'm like, so it means you don't really know how it looks like. So now, if we aren't even clear on how does it look like, because we have this sense, I don't want to fail, I'm afraid of failure, but we don't really know how it looks like. Now it can potentially be anything. So now anything that we see as might be a potential threat, or like getting close to failing or whatever, that's why we are so alert that we are always afraid of failing, because most of the time we don't even know how it looks like. But if you know that, this is how failing looks for me in this situation, that's where you can actually be able to maybe be more calm, or or less alert, because then it doesn't seem like anything can potentially be a failure or a sign of failure, but you actually know how does it look like. But that's something that was really interesting for me, that when I would ask people, because so many people, they would tell me, I'm afraid of failing or failure. And I'm like, okay, so when it comes to this area, how does the failure actually looks like? And almost always, I would say like 99% of the time, people are like, I think it would look like this. And I'm like, wait, so you don't even know how it looks like? So how you know that? Because when we don't know what is it, how, even like, I think one of the ways how I describe it is that if you don't know how does the monster look like that you're afraid of, now everything potentially can be that monster.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how what I have seen when it comes to like failure with a lot of people. But even with being in the group, and I also want you to touch on vulnerability, because it's something that I read you that you were writing about in your blog. Really interesting conversation that I had with Dr. Rob Bell was about, he in his book was writing about how many times when we fail, our initial reaction is to isolate ourselves, because we don't want to show others or others to see that we're not perfect, that we failed, something like that. But it actually is necessary for us not to isolate ourselves and be vulnerable, because that's where we can actually move forward quicker. Because now as you isolate yourself, you actually keep going down, because you can't really help much yourself, especially if you're not in a good mental state, which most of the time when we fail, we are not. It's like we're like, yay, I failed. Unless you have done like a lot of work on your mindset and you don't really see failure as something negative. But that takes a lot of work. And still then, but even then, you might get to the situation when you're like, oh, this sucks. And you naturally want to put yourself out of this like social situation so that you don't have to admit that I failed, I'm not perfect, or whatever. So even when it comes to failing, or not even just failing, but I just want to, okay, that actually goes into imposter syndrome, being vulnerable. How do you deal, like even yourself, because you were writing about your experience as well. How did you deal with being vulnerable? Or as you said about like your book, that once it was out, part of you was out there as well. So now it's exposed. How you deal with that experience?
It's a learned love, which I think is really interesting. And when you write a book, at first, like you kind of said, you're isolated. You are doing this for you. It's your thoughts, your attitudes. It's on paper. It's on your screen. Nobody sees it.
Yeah.
Except for maybe your coach. But it's the moment you start getting maybe beta readers or advanced copy readers, or you publish, you have to be okay with somebody reading your work. That's the whole reason you did this, was to make that connection. And I think it's the mindset, like you said, it's the learned mindset of people are going to read my work. Some people are going to really like it and really agree with it, and some people aren't. And I think it's taking, like, to allow yourself to be vulnerable is to build up a filter, if that makes sense. Like, so for example, someone gives me a negative review on my book. I get a 1 star on my book. And that really hurts, because you are so vulnerable to feedback. But then there's this split second where you get to think, is this a credible source? Were they in my intended audience? Were they who I was actually speaking to? And do I give this permission to affect how I see myself?
Yeah.
And in that split second where you run it through those 3 kind of qualifiers, and usually it's the last one of like, no, I don't give this permission. This does not say anything about me as a person. And you allow that vulnerability to continue, because you're filtering who you're vulnerable to.
Yeah.
And this is why I hate social media. Like, I'm all over social media. I have Facebook, TikTok, Instagram. It's part of my business. Hate it. Absolutely hate it, because it's the best of the best in most cases. And that's why I like my blog, is because it's not my best side. It is all of me. And I think it's so important for people to see the all of you side, because it makes you so much more relatable, and it gives people permission to be vulnerable themselves. Yeah, I hope that answered your question.
And I think it's also, if you're vulnerable, because that's a really interesting thing, is that if you're vulnerable, it's actually easier for others to connect with you, because now they see that, oh, you're just like me. You're not perfect. And that's something that I have seen a lot, is where we have this idea that we have to show up as perfect, as know it all. I know this, or like, let's say, if I'm coaching on this, I know everything about this. I'm living this like 24/7. I never fail. I never whatever. And we have this sense that that's how we have to show up, because we are experts. We have to show up as experts.
Yeah.
But then as you do that, for many people, it might be a challenge to actually connect to you, because they struggle with that. It doesn't mean that now you have to show that, oh, I'm failure, this and that, like just like kind of count up all your failures, but show that, oh, like I did this, but I didn't do this. And at the same time, you give a chance for people to actually connect to you and see that you're a human. And I think that's where people are able to see that you're a human. For some reason, you get this higher trust level, because they see that, oh, you're not just somebody who is like way different from me. You still have some kind of bits that I can connect to or relate to. So that's what you said about being relatable when you're vulnerable. That is so, so, so true. And even what you said about that sense of judgment with the feedback or review or anything really. That's something that I feel when we do a work that is related to us. So like, I think book is a great example, because you're the author. You wrote it. It's your job. You literally put in hours and hours and hours of work. And now when you get this review, it might feel less like review of the book than review of you. Because you, in a way, that book is part of you. You have put a lot of you in that book. So now when you get some bad reviews or bad feedback on that book, it might feel like that feedback is actually directed to you personally. And I think that's where it might actually a lot of times be a challenge to put this like boundary, or be able to distinguish which one is which, because that's something that great example was one of my one of my guests on the podcast, Maria. She's a IP attorney, and it was a really interesting conversation, because she said that I have been working as attorney for like 10 plus years in industry. But when I started my own business, I was like, it was a really big challenge to get the first client. And it wasn't because she didn't have skills. She's brilliant at what she's doing, and she's so passionate. But as we were speaking, I started to understand that one of the challenges that she might have had was that, and she also agreed to that, because when you work in this big corporate, like business or company, it's not your name that is attached to it. So now when you get like bad review or somebody says no, you don't take it personally. They say no to the company, not you. But when you are your company, when somebody says no, you actually take it personally, because in a way they are saying no to you as well, not only your service. And I think that's where it's really interesting how we distinguish that. Is there something that you have noticed that helps you to, I don't know if you even get any negative reviews, but like if you do get any, is there something that you have noticed that helps you to deal with them?
This is a bit of a boast, but I have not had any negative reviews on my printed works or my programs at this point. What I will say is very similar is Rejection.
Mm-hmm.
And that, like you said, they don't want to work with you, so they're rejecting me. And it goes through the same kind of filter of like, okay, so this person didn't want to work with me, or they didn't want to partner with me, or whatever the case might be. Is it because they don't like me? Maybe. Is that my fault? No. Right? You put it through the same filter of, is it credible? Is it who I was intending it for? And do I give it permission to hurt me? And if you put that rejection through the same filter, it's very surprising how few things you let resonate. And they're typically, it's family and close friends that you let through, because it's their feedback that you actually value. Otherwise, you can look at like, so that one client that's like, no, I don't want to work with you. I didn't like what you said. That's fine. If we work together, you'd just be an unhappy customer. So you're dodging a bullet, right? It's kind of a thing like, if you don't want to work with me, I don't think I want to work with you. Yeah. So yeah, there's that filter component of like, I don't let this let this hurt me. And it probably saved me.
Yeah. And I think that's interesting that it helps. I think at least when it comes to getting clients, I don't know, let's say even with coaching, when you have this mindset that you need the client, now you feel like when they say no, they are rejecting you. But at the same time, even like I have said this so many times that even when somebody says no, it might literally be my face. They just don't like my face or my accent or whatever. And once you accept that I'm not for everybody, that's where you are more open. I don't want to say necessarily welcoming to like negativity or negative feedback, but you are not surprised when it comes, because you don't have this unrealistic expectation that now everybody will like your work or anything like that. Or you will get no negative feedback, so that when you actually get it, you are easily to be like, you're like thrown off. You're like, so like somebody didn't like my work, and literally that's all you think about. I got this one negative review, and maybe that person just had like bad mood, or they just had to get their emotions out. But that's something that I have seen even online with like negative comments, things like that, that the more even like with negative feedback, and that's something that I wrote down, is vulnerability versus ego protection. So what I meant by that was that, as we were talking about negative feedback, a lot of times maybe even our ego, because it wants to protect us, wants to justify why that review or feedback isn't valid. Oh, this person is this or that or whatever, even if that feedback actually is valid. Or let's say it comes from a person who is in a position where they can give this feedback. But now, because that feedback isn't really comfortable and it triggers our ego, we get the sense that want to either protect it, react back, or whatever each of us react to what our ego decides to do, or what's like typical thing to do. And usually what I have learned is that if something triggers me, it doesn't matter if somebody says something or whatever. Like some time ago, I would feel like, oh, they are this and that, or I would address, or not address them, but think of them a certain way. And it, of course, it depends on the person that is saying that. But now when something triggers me and I'm like, I stop and I think, okay, there's something that I need to work on. Because if something outside of me triggered me, it means that there's something inside of me that isn't resolved if I'm in a position where I'm triggered. So now I look at them as small gifts that I get, that I open up, and I'm like, oh, today I work on this, or like this is the new project that I have to work on. And it helps me to maybe deal with that ego side where when you get this like negative feedback, you really want to protect yourself. And even, you might even, I don't know if any of your clients have, because it sounds like you're in really good space with like the feedback. And I'm pretty sure there's a reason for that as well. I haven't read your book yet, but now I actually want to get to reading it. But like that's where that ego game is. It's really interesting how it works, because there's so many things that we tell ourselves. I'm not sure. I think that's something that you were talking about that I wrote down about that, kind of the idea that we have about ourselves and who we actually are, that they're two different things. But I don't remember what exactly was it that you said. But okay, I might remember. So let's get to the writer's block. So how like one thing that you said is that it looks like when you don't know what to write or like how to write, it's something like that. So what is a good way to deal with writer's block?
Yeah, writer's block typically comes in the form of, okay, I want to write, I'm ready, my space is set up, I have the time. And then you sit and you look at the page and you're like, oh my goodness, I don't know what to write. And a really good way to do that, there's a couple of good ways. One, you can tough it out, sit down until you get something. That rarely works. And I think that's where people get stuck, is that they just sit there for the full hour that they've set aside and nothing comes out. And so the next time they go to pick up their book, they're just frustrated. Oh, I failed last time, I'm going to fail again. So I like to say, get up, walk around. That's one way of doing it. Go for a walk. Take up 15 minutes of your hour. So you only write for 45 minutes, not a big deal. Go do something else. We also create, the second way is we create an outline in the very beginning of our program. Fall back on your outline. Use, sometimes it's all it takes is a title to jog some progress in you. And then, if your outline, let's say on your outline, you have your mindset as one of your topics, and you're looking at mindset and just can't come up with anything. So the next one is, let's say, fear of failure, for example. It's a little bit under mindset, but it has its own topic. Skip to that topic. Skip over mindset for today and go to something else. That's a really good way to kind of clear yourself. Another way might be to write about something entirely outside of your book. Write about what you ate for breakfast. Describe it. How did it make it feel? How did it make you feel? How did it taste? How did you make it? That can really get the juices flowing for you. So you spend 10, 15 minutes doing that, and then you come back to your main topic and it all just clicks and flows. And then another way is to, I just had it, now I lost it. I'll remember it. I just need a second to come back to it.
One thing that you said as you were thinking,
yes.
One thing that you said, not one thing that you said, but like as you were speaking, I was thinking about, I wrote down like, be okay with messy. That, let's say, as you said that, oh, like today I have to write about mindset. And I think that's where a lot of times we think that I have to follow this specific order. I'm not allowed to now jump to the next thing if I don't feel like it. But you probably can agree, you know more than I do, but I assume that book writing process is quite messy, because you're pretty much like trying to build up something from nothing. And I think a lot of times we have this idea that that process has to be perfect, but most times it's not. It's quite messy. So do you know what helps to be okay with that messiness of that process?
Yeah. And this is why I love working with entrepreneurs, is because they started in messy. When they started their business, they typically, unless the lawyer you were talking about who came from a firm, but she still had to go through the process of starting up her own business. And there's this huge learning curve. And if you get stuck in the mindset that I have to be perfect before I start, you will never start.
Yeah.
And so entrepreneurs that are, successful and at the spot where they're ready to, boost their business, they're ready to write a book and invest, they're used to messy. And so just reminding them of that, of like, hey, do you remember when you started, where you were at, and then where you are now? Like, imagine that kind of progress in 10 weeks of where you can take your book from nothing to published. And I think that is just a really good reminder for people, is that it's okay to start messy, because it will become finished. And that's a really powerful mindset to have coming in, like you said. You mentioned it earlier in the book that you're reading, that it's the messy first draft or something like that. And that's so true. I think it's Brene Brown she says something about the shitty first draft is what she calls it. And she's not talking about books. She's talking about the story you tell yourself in your mind is the shitty first draft. And I love that because it opens your mind up to a critical thinking, and it makes you analyze it. So you spill it all out, and then you have to go back with a critical eye and say, is this true? Is this valid? Is this right? All of these things that you have to feel. And you have to do that with a book and your mind, right? So I like that analogy from her.
This is something that, as you were talking, this morning I was thinking about like belief in yourself or trusting the process. And I was thinking about Thomas Edison. So here's what I was thinking about. So we all know what is electricity. We know how it works. So now if I would have to imagine creating electricity, I kind of get an idea what is it I'm creating. But in his case, he didn't even really know how it will look like or what it will look like. He just would experiment and try again and again and again for like thousands of times. And that made me think about that, in a way, stubborn trust in yourself, in your abilities, and in your ability to go as far as needed to get to whatever is the goal. And that's where I think a lot of times our doubt or lack of confidence gets in the way, because as you said, like, or to complement what you said, that's something that I tell a lot is I really need to succeed at anything is to just go one step further than the person next to you. That's all I really need to do. Just one step further than they do. Because once they stop and you take that one extra step, that's it, you're winning. But at the same time, a lot of times we feel like it's so hard to keep going. Or even like, speaking of the reason why I was mentioning Edison, if somebody hasn't really wrote a book, for them it might seem like this like moment that was for Edison, creating a light. I don't really know even how it looks like, or what is the end goal or the end project. I don't even have an idea how it can look like. So how do you approach the process when you know this is what I want to create? Let's say write a book, but I have never wrote a book. I don't really know like what I want or what will the end result look like. Which is also one thing that you're writing about in your blog, is that the story, the book that you're writing, that the story started to kind of evolve. But like, how do you approach it when you have this, like, you don't really know, you know?
Yeah. And so I read about this in my new book. I love that you're reading a book on how to write, because I'm writing a book on how to write. And there's two kind of categories of people. There's a planner and then there's a pantser. And it's a super weird word. I know. I don't know where it comes from, but it's a funny one. But the planner will not start writing until they know exactly what's going to happen. And then the pantser will have this idea, think it's cool, start writing about it. and you're and sometimes you can be a mixture of both. Like I'm a bit of a mixture of both. Like I have an idea and then I will maybe plan out chapter headers or something like that. And it depends on the genre that you're writing in. Like, as I kind of indicated in my blog, with my sci-fi novel, I had no idea where I was going. I started with a name, and it started out as a game. I started with a name and an opening scene. By the time I was done, I was on a different planet. So I really had no idea where it was going. But with my How to Write a Book, I knew what my intent was. I knew what my title was, and I knew what my chapters were. And then I kind of went from there. So it's a mixture of both. But when you come in to my program in particular, you do have an idea. Well, typically you do, because the way it's set up, like when I onboard people, and even in the discovery call, we talk about, well, what do you want in your book? And if the answer is I don't know, I kind of give them 4 places to start. And that really, because they're not writing in the creative sense of creating another story, like a world, they're writing on technical aspects of, this is what my program is, this is how I help people, this is my story. It's not as creative as a fiction book might be. So it's a little bit easier for them. But my advice, and this is why I wrote my book, my advice for those people that are looking at this project, they know they want to write a book, but they don't know what to write about, is to figure out what your planning style is. Because once you can figure out your planning style, you can figure out what you need. If you are a planner, then do not start writing until you have all the details. Because if you start writing, you will not succeed, because you'll get frustrated. And on the flip side, if you're a pantser and you try to be a planner, you'll do 2 things. You'll either get frustrated and never start because you feel like you're failing because you don't know all the details, or you will create this really beautiful plan, and this has happened to me, and then you'll get to chapter 2 and you say, I don't like that plan and I'm going to throw it out. And so you lose maybe a month's of work because you did it wrong and you didn't stick to your style. So once you know your style of planning, it becomes a lot easier for you to accept what your writing is going to look like and how it's going to flow. And I cater more to the planner in my programs, because it's an easy way to keep them on track. And it's only 4 weeks of writing. And so having a plan, it goes a long ways. But even for my pantser clients, they necessarily aren't doing the planning. It's me. And we're doing it together, right? They're giving me like topics, and I'm probing them and asking them questions and details and clarity, and supporting them when they don't stick to a plan. And that's so common with pantsers, is you give them this plan, they're like, I was writing and I got this new idea, and it's like, okay, that's fine, let's revise the plan. So we always have a framework to come back to. But that initial overwhelming, I don't know what to write about, really comes down to your style.
Yeah. How do you find your style?
Oh, good question. You buy my book. No, I'm just kidding. So yeah, I wish I had my book in front of me. But there's a couple of questions you can ask yourself. Like the first one would be, when you think of your book. So generally when people commit to writing a book, they have maybe a topic. And when you think of this topic, do you see it like a movie in your head? Are the characters alive in your head? Can you feel them in your heart? Do you know what their main problem is? Do you know who the protagonist is? And if you can feel all that and you can see all that, you're a little bit more in the planner phase. So it's literally just taking those scenes out of your head and putting them on paper. And then another way is to, just ask yourself, do you know what happens between A and C, or A and Z maybe? If you can answer, B, C, D, E, then you're a planner. If you can't, then you're a little more pantser. And there's a couple of other questions, I can't remember them off the top of my head, that you might ask yourself. But the struggle would be if you're a bit of both. And then you have to find that balance. Planners, easy. I need to plan this out. And what planners can create is absolutely beautiful. I've seen people, they have a big board on their desk or on the floor sometimes because it's so big, and they take colored sticky notes and they write out each scene and each flow and each character detail, and it is this gorgeous storyboard. And then I've seen planners use like software to plan out their book, and then you get the pantsers who are like, I don't need that. I'm just going to start writing. So you know fairly early on what's going to work for you. If you sit down and you cannot write without notes, you're a planner. It's kind of that simple.
Yeah. That's interesting. So just knowing that there isn't really like one style on one way or one best way. You just have to find what is the best way or best approach or style for you, and then use that. And even like good way how you can find your style is just doing it or trying out different styles until you find something that clicks. And oh, this works. Is there a difference between how you approach writing fiction and nonfiction? Or if I assume there should be difference, and what would be that difference or the main differences between them?
Yeah, I love that question because I can speak to it personally in the sense that I've written in both genres several times. And I've also written children's books, which is a whole separate genre in itself. But when it came to, like I said, my sci-fi novel, very much pantser, had no idea what was going to happen. When it came to my nonfiction, how to write a book, it's very different when you're trying to teach somebody something. You have to be chronological. You have to follow a flow that their brains are going to resonate with and going to make it a step-by-step process. And that is pretty much the key of a nonfiction book. Is you're trying to, it doesn't always have to be teach, but like teach, convince, inform, entertain, whatever the case might be. It has to be chronological and it has to make sense. So I'm not going to tell you how to edit your book before I tell you how to write your book. It just doesn't make any sense. And so, yeah, it does matter what your genre is and what style you're writing in, because I'm a pantser at heart. I had to flip for my nonfiction book. I had to become a planner, and not like to the detail of a storyboard on my floor, but I had to have titles at least. And I had to have an idea of how it was going to flow for sure.
Isn't it similar with the fiction as well? Because you still have to keep in mind that there's some kind of order that the story should go in, where people follow this like specific, not necessarily step by step, but there still is some kind of order in which the story goes.
Yeah, there is. And it so depends on the style you want to write in. And again, I'm boasting my book a lot, but I talk about this in my book. There's planning style and there's like writing style. And there's kind of 4 main styles that you can write in. And like it's linear, expository, and there's 2 more that I can't think of off the top of my head. But when you go into a book, you kind of have to pick what your style is, because the problem is if you don't pick your style, you can flip-flop and then your book gets really confusing, kind of to the point where you're saying. So if I start in linear, where like I go from point A to point Z and it's all in order, and then I flip to, like, let's say it's not the right title, but a non-linear style where I suddenly have flashbacks in my book, and I throw in one flashback in the middle of my book and it's really weird and out of place, and my readers aren't expecting that, you can lose a following because that's you've switched your style. So you're right in a sense that you do need to know what your style is, how you're going to approach your story. And if you're doing linear is the most common, then flashbacks would be the second for fiction books. But when you're writing in a linear fashion, you have to have 5 components to your story. You have to, the intro, the rising action, the climax, the fallout, the resolution. So you do have to know your components. What you don't have to know is what they look like. And if you are a natural born writer, it will just come naturally to you, that you will ebb and flow. Like if you watch movies, you know how it's supposed to work, right? You inherently know. With the nonfiction genre, you don't have those set points. Sorry, that's my printer. You don't have those set points of, the rising action, the climax. It doesn't work that way. You're more of the informed style of book. And so it's a little bit different of like, you have to methodically think it out because it's not as intuitive as a nonfiction, or a fiction book might be.
So let's say with the fiction book, is there, because that's something that I don't know where, but I watched about or read about when, let's say, when you make a movie, you have to always keep in mind that only that journey that, let's say, the main character is on during the movie, but also the journey that the person who is watching the movie is going on. So that's something similar with books, I assume, as well. So how do you approach that? Or is there like a system or things that you need to keep in mind as you, let's say, you probably don't think about it initially in the first draft, but as you edit the book or go through that process, what are things that you need to keep in mind when it comes to readers' journey as they read, let's say, the main character's journey?
There's so many things I could talk about on this topic.
Go ahead.
The first one I would think about is your character development. And if you come in with a character that you don't describe, you don't understand their morals, their values, their beliefs, you cannot make them seem realistic in their decisions and their actions. And when you have a character that is just doing stuff and you don't know why and you can't follow along, you're not going to relate to them. And so we talked about vulnerability earlier. As a person, as a character, they need to be vulnerable too. And so to do that, you really have to plan out. And that's why if I were ever to dabble in the fiction genre of book coaching, the first thing I would have my clients do is spell out their characters and do a detailed, demographic, psychographic, beliefs, values, pain points, all of these things for their character before they even write their name down. Because if you don't have a character that your readers can relate to, they will not like your book. It's a guarantee. And then the second point I would have is this is really challenging for writers because when you write a character, they're in your mind and they're a person and a living entity. It can be hard to remember that your readers don't have that same view of your characters, that you have to build that for them. And you don't want to data dump. You don't want to tell them all the things up front about your character that makes them who they are. You want to pepper it in throughout the story. But this is where beta readers can come in really help, like as really helpful entities to your book. A beta reader is somebody that you're done your first and maybe even your second draft, and you give it to a beta reader and you get their feedback on did they like it? Did they not like it? What parts did they like? They can tell you pretty early on, didn't like your main character, didn't relate to them, didn't understand why they were doing what they were doing. And you can take that feedback and hopefully internalize it, like we were talking about feedback earlier, like it is valuable feedback, and use it and adjust your characters. And then the third thing is the show versus tell in a book. And so like this show, for example, is very tell. We are describing to our listeners what is happening and we're telling them the details. A show would be describing what is happening. So for example, I'm waving my hands in the air and I'm gesturing and I'm talking empathetically and I'm doing like all these descriptor words. It shows the reader more. And what's really interesting in the show versus tell is that when you are showing, there's neurons in our brain, they're called mirror neurons. And it was a study done a number of years ago where you had a monkey reaching for a banana and these neurons would light up in their brain. And then you had a monkey watch another monkey grab a banana, the same neurons light up. And so if you were taking your readers through showing them what's happening, they can picture it in their mind as if it's actually happening. And so it's the same effect as if they were doing it themselves. So if you step away from the tell, and again, this is really, really more in fiction books, If you step away from the tell, your readers step into your story and you're showing them what's happening. You're using colors, you're using feelings, you're using shapes, feelings as in like your emotions, but also textures. You're using all these things to describe what is happening, so your readers are really invested in it.
That's really interesting. And what you said about that hero has to be relatable. I think that's really similar to what we were talking about, that showing up as not perfect, or showing that like you're not perfect. Are there some things that, or like, I don't know, if there are like any common things that, or like, how do you even find that thing that is relatable? Because that's I think that can be a big challenge as well, because I can relate to something differently than maybe somebody else. So is there a way to or like, how do you approach that or find that relatability piece?
Yeah, this kind of comes back to, how I talked about mapping out your character and giving them beliefs and values and things like that. This is something I really wished I had learned earlier on in my book writing process, is that I am writing to someone in particular. I'm not writing to the world. My book will not hit with everybody. That's just not possible from a piece of work. But I was writing to someone in particular. And had I understood who I was writing to early on, like so I do the psychographics and demographics for my character. If I had done that for my ideal reader as well, I could have hit those relatability points even more. So my reader likes coffee in the mornings. Like, my reader likes coffee all day. My character drinks coffee all day. Right? If they have the same beliefs, and it doesn't have to be 100% carbon copy, but if you can pull out little things that your reader will relate to, I just watched a little video on a woman who does romance books, comedy romance books, and she has 27 books, but she has 3 that are her biggest hits, and she writes all over the map, in the same genre, but all over the map. And her 3 biggest grossing books all feature single dads. And so she has got a very specific market there of relatability. People want to know about single dads, and not perfect single dads, rough and tumble single dads. And so she had one book that did very well. She said, that is a genre or a niche I can hit. And she did it 2 more times. So she understood who her ideal reader was before she even wrote the book.
So as you were speaking about characters, one thing that you wrote was that it's a challenge for you to come up with a name for the character. But even when it comes to creating a character, how do you create it, or where do you even start? Like, do you start with the character, or do you start with this like idea of what the story will be like? How does that look? Or like, again, like pretty much like, where do you start? That imposter syndrome.
Yeah. So again, in a fiction piece of work, like so many things with writing a book, there is no right way to do it. If you start with a story, cool, and you need to fill in the character to make the story progress and seem realistic, great. In my case, I started with a character, and it was based on my needs at the time of writing. I needed a character that was flawed. I needed a character that was kind of like me, because she was my way of processing my emotions. And I needed her to get better. Those were the 3 things I needed from her. And I think if you go in with what you need from a character standpoint, like as a person, what do you need? Because quite often our ideal reader is us. Pretty much always how it is. So you analyze yourself. What do I need from this character? What do they have to look like? What do they have to, and not look like physically, although that is a component, but like, what are their beliefs? Who they love? Who loves them? And if you start thinking about that, pretty quickly you can lay out a character, and it gets a little tough for the planners, because if you have all of your set plot points and you develop a character that would not take you that way, you have a problem. So the planners need to think not just in plot points, but in characters as well, in character traits. Whereas pantsers can come up with a character, and every time they come to a pivotal point in their story, if they fall back on their character development, what would this character do? And it's you can fall into the trap of, what do I want this character to do, or what should they do, versus what would they actually do? What are their flaws? What's holding them back? Because readers want stupid decisions, because it gets them aggravated and it gets them annoyed, and they don't want consistent stupid decisions, but they want them to be vulnerable. Because everybody makes stupid decisions.
and again, it helps with that relatability piece. Where they're like, that's a stupid decision, but they might be made some kind of similar decision myself in the past, or recently, you never know. Like one thing that you were talking about, that it helped you to process emotions, that's something that I wanted to touch on. That how did that, or even how does writing process itself, that like I can speak only at this point about like journaling, how it helps to process your emotions. But it was really interesting when I was reading that for you, writing the book actually helped you to process your emotions. And now as you were talking, I kind of understood it a bit better, but I want you to talk more on this because this is really interesting.
Yeah. So at the time of writing my sci-fi book, I was reading another series. Can I say the name?
Yeah.
It was the Red Rising series by Pierce Brown. And I loved the books, was so invested in them, read them all, except for the last one I got a little hung up on. And
how many are there?
There's 5, I think.
Okay.
4 or 5. I read the first 3 for sure. And then I think I stopped at the 4th one because it switched up styles on me. And again, when we were talking about styles, I was really mad when he switched styles. It did not work for me. I was used to a certain style, loved it, and then he switched. I'm like, I don't want to read this. But so his style of writing was really unique in one way. But what I really disliked was how easy his character grew. He just seemed to know the answers, and things were working out for him, and all of this stuff was just happening. Great books, love the story, love the premise, struggled with the character development. So when I started thinking about writing my own book, or realized I was writing a book, I knew right away that my character was going to struggle. She was going to make bad decisions. She was going to have anxiety. She was going to hurt. And she was going to have family troubles. And she was going to have all of these things happening to her. And it wasn't going to be easy. Nothing was going to come easy to her. And I think there's only one spot in the book where she lucks out. But that's life too, right? Sometimes lucky things happen to us. And
actually many times we earn that luck as well.
Yeah, exactly. Your karma bucket kind of a thing, right? Yeah. So it was, as far as processing my own emotions, when I started writing my book, I knew what I needed, in a sense that I needed somebody weak like me. I needed somebody emotionally fragile, and weak is not the right word. I would never use weak to describe a person with depression, but struggling. But I needed her to get better. And
or you might actually say feeling weak, not necessarily being weak.
Yeah, feeling weak, feeling fragile, right? And to be a good story, she has to grow. Nobody wants to read about a permanently sad character. That's just a downer. She had to grow. And so by helping her develop coping mechanisms and helping her overcome challenges, it was like I had to do them too. So there's a spot in the book, I think it's very early on, where she has a mantra that she tells herself. And I wish I could remember what the mantra is. But that was the mantra that I had to develop for her, that became my mantra for when I needed it the most. My mantra has since changed because I've changed and I don't need that old version anymore. But she says this to herself throughout the book. And so every time I wrote it, I told it to myself. And it was so powerful to watch her grow because her coping mechanisms became mine. I lived and breathed her for 2 months. She was my everything. And watching her grow kind of forced me to grow with her.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting thing because one thing that I wrote down is that you said that she had to grow, and as a result, you also had to grow. And I think one of the reasons might have been that for you to understand her as she's growing, you have to grow yourself so that you have an understanding of this growing process. And now you get better insight in how does that look like. So in a way, you maybe without like real intention, you in a way projected your own life or your own journey and growth by her growth. And really interesting thing you just said is that you watched her grow. It wasn't like you created it or you built it or you wrote it, but it's actually as you watched it, as it's something that appeared in front of you, even though you are the one who was actually writing it. So that's a really interesting way how you described it. So can you describe more that sense of you watching it? Because I can be somebody who is watching, because I'm not like logically, I'm not really writing it. I'm reading it. So I'm actually watching. But you as a writer, you said that you were watching. How does that process look like?
That's a good question because it was just kind of something that happened. And I think if I think about planning styles, again, that was very much a benefit of my Pantster style, was that it was unfolding as it was happening. So it was kind of like watching a movie. It was flowing from brain to fingertips, and I was in the moment with her. I didn't know what her next moves were going to be. I didn't know what her next challenges were going to be. So as she got there, they surprised me too. Oh my goodness, you're doing what? And she was separate of me, was and is separate of me. Yes, she's based on me, but she was based on a future version of me, maybe. And again, I needed somebody that was vulnerable and fragile. I needed her to get to be someone that was strong and confident. But all the in between, I didn't know. I didn't know how she was going to get there. So I was watching it unfold at the same time that it was happening, just like a movie.
Yeah. Did you, as you were writing it, did you know where the story would go, or like what would be the end result, or it was just like, oh, that's interesting?
I had no idea. I knew there was going to be aliens.
Yeah.
So I knew she likely had to travel off planet. And I knew that I would dabble with space and time travel. And this is not spoilers or anything, I had no idea there would be a war. I had no idea that she would find friendship the way that she did. I had no idea who those characters were going to look like. I had no idea that she would physically change, not just mentally or emotionally. I had no idea.
Yeah, that is interesting. Wait, so as you're running this story and you don't really know where it's going, you don't really know how it will like evolve, as you write your book, how do you know at what point it's the end of it? Like, when do you stop? Because that's, I think, another challenge that even it was interesting for me to listen some artists talk about. At what point do you know that the work or the art is done?
For me, because I followed the linear plot style, like a movie, it went up and then it came back down. And when it came back down, I had to make a choice. Do I stop here or do I give her another problem? And it's really like, you start with one problem, you resolve one problem. And if you step into a second problem, you have a second book. And so once you resolve the first problem and the conflict is done and you have the fallout and the resolution, you step away from it. The problem I had, so I chose not to step away from it. This is book 1 of 3. So I have a prologue, an epilogue. I can never remember which one's which. I have a chapter at the end of my book that is a sneak peek to the second book.
Okay.
So I chose to introduce another problem, but you kind of move problem to problem. The Biggest issue I had was knowing when to stop editing, because every time you read your book, you think of ways it could be better, or you find things that sentence structure, all these little tiny nuances. I read my book probably 6 to 7 times. And eventually I had to say, it's that progress versus perfection. If I don't publish this thing now, I never will, because it will never be 100% perfect in my eyes. But to my ideal reader, will it spark joy? Will it draw them in? Will it make them happy? If my answer was yes, I had a good story. It was ready for readers. They would never know that in my eyes, it wasn't perfect. Because nothing is perfect, right? So that's where I struggled, was with the editing part of it. When do you stop rereading your work?
So how does the editing process look like?
Oh, it's the worst. So you're going to go through multiple drafts of your book. You have your first draft, which we talked about as being messy and sloppy. Then you have your second draft where you've written it. And this is where you really start to show versus tell. So your first draft is pretty much all tell. You're just getting the story down on paper. The second draft is when you start to describe things and feelings and colors and scenery a little bit more. Typically after your second draft, you give it to a beta reader, and then you take in the beta reader's feedback, and then you make the changes. So for example, with my beta reading, they told me the start of my story sucked. And I was like, oh, well, that hurts. But super good feedback, because I was able to go back and I rewrote the first 4 chapters from scratch. They look completely different than they did in the first draft. So then you do that, and that kind of brings you to your third draft. And then after your third draft, generally you go to an editor. And so you hire somebody. For most cases, you would hire somebody, and then depending on what style of editor you hire, there's a couple different styles. They'll either give you feedback on grammar and spelling, and that's it. Or they'll give you sentence structure, or they'll give you plot outline feedback. And so then you take their feedback and you go into draft 4. And draft 4 is you have all of their feedback, and then you move into draft 5, which is typically your published manuscript. You might choose to send your manuscript to, they're called ARC readers, advanced reader copies. You might send it to them, but typically you're not looking for feedback from them. You're looking for reviews that you can use to market your book. So it's on average 5 copies, I would say.
So how important is the cover? Because that's something that I hear a lot, that a lot of times, like, I don't know the percentage, but big percentage of whether, like, making that decision, whether to buy or not, is based on the cover.
It's everything. And that sucks. It is and it isn't. So in book and mortars, or brick and mortar stores where you have physical copies on the book, it is everything. That cover is going to be everything, with the exception of, like, the staff pick sections that might influence you a little bit more. When it comes to like Amazon, it's less important because you're looking more at the reviews of the book. So if you have an ebook, you can get away with a fairly basic cover, in my opinion. This is just what I would do, because you're looking at books that have 4 to 5 stars. So the cover art is a little less important in that sense. Whereas in like the physical stores, you don't have other readers review. You can't bank on that. So when I published my first book, I hired somebody to do my cover art. And they did a great job. They did a fabulous job.
I was about to ask you about your covers.
Yes. Yeah. So my first book, I hired somebody. My book that I'm publishing now, because it's a different genre, it's very basic. I did it myself. I did it in Canva, and Canva is amazing. Like my favorite tool in the world. And you just, search ebook covers and thousands pop up. and you get all this motivation and all this, you know, excitement, and you can build whatever you want. So it depends on where you're marketing your book and how you're marketing your book, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So speaking of marketing a book, can you tell more about your books? We kind of touched on them, but a bit more detail.
Yeah. So my sci-fi book is called The Defender, and it's available on Amazon. You can get it at Chapters, Barnes and Noble, and we've talked about it so much, I don't even know what to say anymore. But it's a really good book for it's been described as a space opera, which until I wrote the genre, had no idea what a space opera was.
What is it?
I have no idea. It's my book. I don't know. I still don't know what a space opera is. But I've had a few people tell me, oh, it's a space opera. And I was like, sure, okay. But it could be constituted as young adult fiction, where there's nothing steamy or romantic or anything that would make it strictly adult. Young adults could very much enjoy this book. But I've had the feedback that like people outside of the genre really enjoy this style of book as well. It's written in third person. So if that's your style of reading, where it's not I statements, it's she statements, there's a component of like you question someone's sexual orientation, I would say. So I've got a little bit of the LGBTQ built in there, very light. Like I would never market it as that kind of book, but it's built in there a little bit. So I've had readers really enjoy the hint at that. It's not in your face, but there's a hint. It's got time and space travel built in there. It's got aliens, it's got war. It really is a straight up sci-fi book. You can't get away with it. Like my husband has likened it to, like, there's components of Dune in there. What else? He's very good at the comparison of what it's like. I think he likened it to Harry Potter once, in the sense of like the character development and the magical aspect of it. Alien Covenant is another one. I've never seen the movie, but he's like, oh my God, it's exactly like that movie. And I was like, oh, okay, that's great. Never seen it, but glad it hits home. So it's a 5-star read, in my opinion. And in, reviews on Amazon and Goodreads and things like that, I've only got 5 stars. So very proud of it. It's been out for a year, I think. Almost to the day, actually. It's been out for a year, and I've sold 150 copies, which is very good for an indie book. It's not a huge revenue source. Like, I think that's the thing my clients struggle with the most, is that you can't expect to make thousands of dollars off of an indie published book. That's just not realistic. Like, my physical copies, I think I make $3.50 every book that's sold. So it's not like a huge boost in my revenue stream, but every time I get a royalty check, I do something special with it, because it's probably the money I've worked the hardest for.
And it might also be among the most meaningful ones, because that book is there to stay. It's not really going anywhere. And the nonfiction one?
Yeah, so it's an interesting one, and I struggled with the title for it and the theme for it, because it's called How to Write a Book, Memoirs and Autobiographies. So it's very specific in its genre. And the reason I struggled with that is because I didn't have to, but I wanted to pick a niche that people would, this is what I want to work on. This is the book I need to read. And what I struggle with is that I'm trying to convey to people that it's a book for anyone. If you want to write a book, this is a great place to start, because it talks about everything we've talked about. It talks about finding your writing style, finding your planning style. It talks about actual writing habits and how to set up a good mindset for writing. It talks about publishing secrets, like how to become a bestseller. That's stuff that applies to any book. And so I kind of pigeonhole myself, because I was practicing what I preached, in a sense that I had to pick a target audience. If I went too broad, it would appeal to no one. If I went too narrow, it would only apply to, 1% of the population, of the author population. So my book title is Memoirs and Autobiographies. My marketing strategy is a little bit more broad, in a sense that if you are looking to write a book and you want to know the ins and outs of the industry, this is a good place for you to start. Okay, now everybody knows. Is there anything that you want to, I don't know, any messages you would want to leave listeners with as we close off? I did an interview yesterday, and they asked me what tips I would give. And my tip then, and I think my tip now, is to invest. And I don't mean invest in money. I mean invest in commitment, and the commitment to yourself more than anything. And when you start writing a book, if you don't invest in yourself, in time and resources, then your book will either not happen, or it will take years to happen. And if it takes years, your motivation to finish is going to go down. And so if you invest up front, if you set your goals, like, for fiction books, in 1 year, I'm going to have a book ready to be read. Set that goal, and then set little tiny milestones that are going to get you to that goal. You're so much more likely to be successful. So really just invest in yourself up front and make this commitment to yourself that you are going to do this. And this is my new mantra: I will do it because I can. Yeah, that's amazing. Well, this was awesome. I think we touched on so many things that for me, it was interesting even to learn about, like, the thinking or the mindset or approaches behind writing, because that's not my world, at least not yet, or not now. So it was amazing. Thank you for coming. Absolutely. Thank you for having me.